Pablo, welcome to the World XP podcast. This is episode number 5, 4, 5, who knows? But Pablo's an athletic trainer, performance fitness, and one of the things that makes you different that from other trainers I've dealt with is the mind to body connection within the athletes. Like you were with somebody this morning and you had them hold out their arm and say what their name was, and they were concentrating, they could push against your arm, but then as soon as you had them to say something that they knew was wrong, they couldn't do it anymore. So that's interesting. I hadn't noticed that before. Why is that, and how did you get onto that path of wanting to explore that connection into where you are now?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me over.
Sure.
I think it's a great source for a lot of people. Well, it depends. So one of the ways we're approaching fitness and approaching a lot of the new strategies for wellness overall is psychological aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this point is depending on your nervous system.
Okay.
And if your nervous system is basically doubting of anything, that can be a movement, it can be a trauma, that can be something that you have dealt with in the past,
right.
Your body knows that that's wrong.
Right.
Even just that small test we did this morning was basically just testing to make sure the person knew what her name was, so she was positive.
Right.
So her nervous system responded positively.
Right.
From the moment she lied about her name, her nervous system knew something was off. So the nervous system let go. And this is basically how it goes in your body.
Okay.
So many times we have all kinds of small triggers, small injuries that we don't even pay attention to it.
Right.
And then remember, your body has millions of cells that communicate with your brain. And sometimes those cells have blockers. But trying to identify what those blockers are is the key to understand why is the nervous system doubting certain movements. And that basically leads into an injury in the long term.
So when the cells or when the nervous system doubts itself, it makes the body do, I guess, almost protect itself in a way that it doesn't need to be protected in an athletic sense because it thinks something wrong is happening to it, which would lead it to do something not. I don't know.
Yes, absolutely. So basically, let's say, for instance, I'm going to put it to you in this content. For instance, let's say I just rolled my ankle 3 months ago, and it was a sprain, 1 degree sprain. So my brain knows that I had an injury, and I'm rehabilitating from it. So whenever I'm ready to step into a field and go and do my whatever sport it is, my brain knows that something is off.
Right.
And it's going to basically take the tension away from my ankle and transfer it to my next joint. And this joint can be my knee. So just to protect my ankle.
So it overstresses the next joint, and then it can lead all the way up to the hips and back.
Correct.
And that's why we see people with back problems, back and knee problems, because they're overcompensating for whatever the weak joint
that is correct.
Muscle is. Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes it's like I have dealt with so many kids between the ages like 13 to 16. And I mean, if you look nowadays, we have kids do crossover sports. They go from basketball to soccer.
Right.
And there's a completely different mechanics.
Right.
Which I have nothing wrong with it, but they have to understand that they got to pick one sport and what they really want to do with that sport. But from the moment they want to take two competitive sports and make it into one, your brain knows that there's something different. Now your brain starts doubting certain movements because of the patterns. Your nervous system doesn't really know what's happening, and that's leading you into a bigger frame of injuries. It can be a bilateral, it can be lineal, it can be so many other things, right?
Right.
But just your brain is doing something completely different. Running from the basketball court, which is smaller, if you're a point guard, it's going to be completely different. If you're an offensive right back in the soccer field, which is going to be doing 120-meter runs.
Yeah. I've often heard when I was younger that crossing over sports was good for you because it allowed you to develop different muscles and take breaks off different, like the same sort of repetitive movement when you were younger, to not tear apart your body at a young age. Is there truth to that, or is it?
There is truth to that, absolutely, because your brain development is a lot different because you're able to see a picture from a different angle.
Right.
It's like if you step on a soccer field as a defender, and if you step on a soccer field as a defender, you look forward. And if the soccer field, if you step on it from the other side, you're a striker, it's a completely different picture.
Right.
Those movements are different. It's the same thing when you cross over sports.
Mm-hmm.
That means you can be doing different sports, but you got to pick one that's going to actually allow you to be your main sport,
Right.
and the other one is going to be like a rec sport. Just deload the stress for your body,
Right.
and don't take it as serious.
Yeah,
you know?
that's what I did with soccer and basketball. Soccer was my main sport, and I played a lot of basketball, but it was never at the level that I played soccer. It was always rec or just pick up with friends. But it was something that allowed me to kind of take the stress off those specific soccer movements, like the planting when to go play a long ball. Like
Correct.
You don't have to do that in basketball, so
Correct.
it would take the stress off the knee and the hip to plant all the time, which kept me healthy probably throughout most of high school throughout most of high school. I didn't really have any injuries, and I had teammates that were only one sport, and they would get injured on a very specific thing.
That's very true. No, I completely agree with that. And just remember, the other thing is like crossing over sports. There's nothing wrong with that. The other thing is basically crossing over sports at the same day. Some kids I know that they go from soccer practice to basketball practice the same day. I mean, like, is something that is way they're overdoing it. It's different if you're taking a break off from soccer during off season and you go and play basketball.
Right.
Now you know that your body is completely loading from. In basketball, it's a hard surface. You take sharp turns, you put a lot of stress on your ankles. Soccer is all kicking. It's a lot of kicking into the ball, so the ankle takes a lot of stress.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of inflammation, it's a lot of impact, it's a lot of stress that goes into those small bones around your feet. So in this case, crossing over sports, I would recommend, for instance, like if I do football, I will do swimming.
Right.
Because there is a non-contact.
Right.
There is non-contact sport.
There's less impact on the joints.
Correct. And you develop completely different musculoskeletal system than what you do with football.
Right.
So now if you're playing basketball, yes, you want to look something that's going to be bilateral, a lot of shifting around, which you have to be able to understand. You will do boxing.
Right.
Why? Because it's the same thing. You will be able to coordinate better, handle with the movements. You'll do karate, something that involves more neuromuscular movements, more specifics than just doing the same over and over drills. Because soccer and basketball drills, many times when you're doing conditionings, they're about the same.
Yeah, they're very similar.
Very similar. So you're overworking the same body parts.
So what sort of things, when you see like late teens, early 20s athletes come in with small, but like the injuries that you're saying before, the small ones that we don't think are injuries, what are the things that we can do to kind of prevent those, and if we do have them, to make sure that they heal and we don't make them worse? I guess what are the sorts of things that you recommend, or like that when you get your athletes, what do you put them through? What kind of like conditioning or training do you put them through?
So, I have a 4-step method that I use, but before I get to that, basically one of the things that I really like doing, my training system is educational. Basically, I educate the athlete, I educate the client, I educate whoever walks through the doors to really see their body, how they move, how they perform from the outside, take videos, and basically use feedbacks. This is an analytic method that for them to understand how they're moving, right?
Sure.
Because a lot of times they know they move in one way, but they think they're doing it, but slightly they start shifting to a completely different patterns.
Right.
For instance, now I'm going to go back into teens. So if you are a 12-year-old athlete versus a 15-year-old athlete, doing the biomechanical point stand of view and also the physiological point of view is you're going to go through puberty.
Right.
You're going to grow. You're going to develop muscle. They're going to still want to move like if they were 12, but they were also 15 pounds lighter.
Right.
Also 4 inches lower. So now their joints haven't been developed to move with a higher amount of weight.
They haven't caught up yet.
Correct.
Right.
So the first thing, we have to explore their body. Basically, scan their body, teach them how their body looks like now. They need to be able to understand dimension and space, speed and force, landing, acceleration, braking system, and also multi-directional movements. From the moment they see weaknesses and be able to see those things, when I will start doing what we call prehab, basically giving orientation to an athlete what they should be working on. So right after they understand things that are not able to push off to the left, or they have a stronger push to the right, now you start developing the sport. Now you start making it specific for that athlete. As soon as they understand that, we'll go into what they call unilateral style training, basically teaching the athlete the right leg or the left leg. If the right side dominant, they're stabilizing with the left. If they're left side dominant, they're going to be stabilizing with the right.
Right.
They got to be able to stabilize with both.
Right.
Retrain the brain. And the people that haven't done it, we have to train the brain to make sure they're doing the patterns the right way. That will teach the nervous system to be confident for whatever movement you're doing.
Right.
Because if the nervous system is not confident, it's almost like trying to punch a rock with an open fist.
Yeah.
You're going to smash your fingers against the rock.
Right.
When you kick a soccer ball, you can't go with a weak ankle to kick a soccer ball. You have to lock your ankle and really kick it.
Right.
But you also have to loosen up the other ankle to be able to rotate. So your brain got to be able to do those things.
Right.
So you got to be able to reset left to right, right to left. And then from there, you go into stability. So the next is when you go into teens, maybe 15, 16 years old, at that point, a professional athlete is basically fully developed.
Right.
Now, what you go at the mechanical point of view is basically seeing what muscles are overcompensating and which ones are undertaking the movement.
Okay.
If some of the muscles are basically not firing for the movement, you're overloading the same muscle. So you got to be able to balance those out.
Right. So how do you go in and balance them out?
First, do a passive assessment.
Okay.
In this passive assessment, you basically see how the body responds for certain movements, right?
Right.
And like this can be like a leg raise. I mean, are they stabilizing with their back or their core? If they're stabilizing with their back, we have to go and reset. They got to be able to stabilize with their core, not with the lower back, because they're going to develop orthosis or something in their back that's going to cause a lot of pain.
Right.
And then we go into, okay, now let's go into a performance movement. This is just a little example, right? And I make them do acceleration point. In acceleration point, they're actually using mechanics for a braking system, which they're using the same muscle to accelerate and decelerate.
Right.
That will cause an injury because now the muscle's going to get tired. The tendon, the articulations, and the ligaments are going to take over, and that's going to lead into an injury. You're going to overload the joint. Okay. So we have to see how to deload the joint by using the muscles that are supposed to use them to use as a braking system.
So is this caused by when they're young, do they get taught improper mechanics, or is it just kind of the coaches that they have early, like the volunteer coaches, they don't know the proper things to teach and they learn as their bodies learn as they're developing the wrong thing, or is there a combination of different things that it could be? Is it like...
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I'm not trying to step on the coaches or anything, because I mean, these teen coaches have 16 kids they're got to work on. It's kind of hard to even just concentrate on one session. So, right, I think it's just the lack of knowledge from the parents. I'm going to blame that on, as a parent, not knowing what's the best thing for my kid, and also not educating ourselves. Right. But there's also not a lot of research in a lot of these things. You're only going to see a lot of those specific mechanics and understanding of the human anatomy when you move into competitive sports. Right. And a lot of trainers also don't have the proper education to be able to coach their athletes. They're going to see a movement. Oh, this is going to make you stronger. It's going to make you faster. But wait a second. These people are developing Ferraris to go 100 miles per hour, but they still use Corolla braking system. Yeah. So they use very weak brake system with a very strong engine to accelerate and jump. Right. But kids don't know how to stop.
How to decelerate and how to land.
There you go. Yes, correct. So first thing, if you want to develop something stronger, you got to be able to teach the kids how to stop before you let them go.
So when you see these athletes that don't know how to stop or don't know the proper landing mechanics, what are the sort of mechanics that you or like what muscles do you teach them, or like techniques do you teach them to fire on when they land or decelerate? I know we were talking earlier about the adductors and then landing, kind of like making sure you jump with your calves and then landing so it doesn't make so much impact on your joints. But are there other things as well, or is it?
It's a lot. So basically, when structuring a program or working with an athlete, as you work with a kid, right? So just think about as we grow as an adult. Right. Right. When you're a kid, what's the first thing you learn how to do? Walk. You learn how to balance yourself in two legs. From learning how to balance yourself in two legs, we're giving you a soccer ball. Yeah. Now you're developing yourself, kicking the ball without even knowing how to use your ankles. And then you go straight into running when you're 7 or 8. But how much time we put into teaching these kids how to move properly?
None.
Correct. So it's analyzing this concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
And wait a second. Now they're 8, 9. They finally have fine motor skills.
Right.
They're learning how to read and write.
Mm-hmm.
And then now we hit them with puberty.
Mm-hmm.
And now they got another growth spurt.
And their body adjusts again.
And the body needs to adjust again. But we didn't teach them through phase 1. And I would expect the kid to readjust in phase 2.
Without having been taught in phase 1.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now you're going through phase 2.
Mm-hmm.
You hit 13. And now your rationality is not there, but you're teaching, the brain is learning how to, the prefrontal cortex is being developed, right? Your brain. Now your brain is learning how to have emotions. Now you're going to have kids falling in love, you're going to have kids that are sad, depressed, and they're going to be a roller coaster of emotions.
Right.
But now the brain is confused between the emotions, and the only outlet is the sport. And now they're taking those emotions out in the sport instead of building up into the sport.
Mm-hmm.
And now what happens then? They have no control over their emotions, and they don't know their body.
Yeah.
What's going to happen?
Injuries.
There you go.
Yeah.
Now rationality in a male or female is going to be developed to your early 20s, mid-20s. They start making rational decisions.
Yeah.
So you see it's all education.
Yeah, you see that in kids when they play angry and then they go into a tackle and they don't know how fast they're going or where their leg is going to end up and they catch somebody on the ankle and all sorts of injuries happen that way, definitely.
Correct. And every athlete is different. Some kids have the capability to understand that quicker than other athletes.
Sure,
and some kids, it's just, they're gifted. Some kids actually have been taught. Some other kids, basically, I think it's there's a responsibility as a parent to basically take the initiative to understand what their kids are going to go through and how to be able to educate them and guide them for the right path.
Right.
And also take them to the professional. I'm not going to take my daughter to a shoemaker when she wants bread.
Yeah, no, of course not.
So it's going to be the same concept, right?
Right.
And the professional point is saying, so when you have developing an athlete at a very young age, it's even harder because now the stress factor comes into place.
Right.
So now the stress factor plus the physical aspect, which is another stress factor. So cortisol is their friend.
Right.
And adrenaline is their best friend.
Right.
But they can even control endorphins. They don't even know what it is. So now their brain is all over the place.
Right.
So they're fighting and they're doing things in a constant motion of just full irregulations.
So how do you get these teenagers with their brains all over the place to retrain them to fire the specific muscles that you need to prevent injuries? Because it seems, as we've talked, I'm sure, like how we've all experienced, like when you're all over the place emotionally, your brain's doing all sorts of things. You weren't taught proper mechanics for whatever the reason was. How do you take these athletes then and you get that specific nerve or that blocker to fire that muscle that you need to decelerate or to land or like whatever you're trying to trigger in them? How are you able to go into that athlete and make that happen successfully? Because it seems like that would be pretty difficult given the wide range of different things.
Absolutely, you're right, yes. And I'm going to go back to the question you asked from before about the structure of the program. Mm-hmm. But I think this is very specific because we glide to 3 different hormones while we're learning things. But besides that, our nervous system goes through a sympathetic nervous stage, which is past stress regulations, and to a parasympathetic nervous stage, which is basically new information coming in, rewiring your brain for new, becoming like a blank piece of paper.
Right.
And when we go into left side of your brain, long-term memory, right side of your brain going to short-term memory. Right. So most of the times you want to shift your athletes in a parasympathetic stage. Okay. Be able to understand that the athlete is basically going to be eyes on you, understanding, and how you will be able to apply these components and retrain the brain to do the proper things. Okay. When you are gliding on a stress hormone, the cortisol is up. So, for instance, right, factor COVID-19 right now, a lot of kids are like, I'm not going to play anymore. My season is canceled. My parents are at home all day. I need some free time. From the kids that walk into the facility or I'm working with a kid, their best friend has been stressed. Yeah. So how do I get this kid to be from the stress factor into a complete endorphin release that way they can able to understand and open up the right side of the brain? This is a psychological game. Be able to change them from their past. Right. I'm like, right now, I need you here right now. Okay, let's do this. And it can be into a mathematical game. Musical can be anything to shift them into a parasympathetic stage. From the moment they go into a parasympathetic stage, open side, or up in the right side of their brain, now I have them working with me. They're present.
Right. So that's interesting. So it goes into this whole sports psychology side of things. You're using it in combination with the physical prehabbing, like you called it earlier, to
Correct.
make sure they don't get injured. But there's a whole other side that's just the mental side. Do you do a lot in that as well, or do you like to keep things in those two things in combination with each other because they work together?
I think it's a great combination. It's basically, it's not like water and oil. This is
Right.
like gasoline and fire.
Right.
It will always lead, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you have an athlete who is just came from an injury,
Mm-hmm.
before I even put this guy to do the biomechanic, I need to really know where his mental stage is.
Right.
Do you really want to continue to do this?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you want to train? I mean, I really need to understand where they stand.
Right. Because if they're not all in, they could get injured again.
Correct. They're going to be doubting themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to say, if not, they're going to power through like we say.
Right.
But that power through is just stress into a firefly trying to get through things done, right?
Right.
But that's not really teaching rational planning. It's into an emotional thinking.
Right.
That emotional thinking, I can get you to get fire up right now, but that's me putting the emotion into you, firing a different epigenetic system.
Right.
But that's going to die 2 weeks from now.
Right.
But from the moment you sit down and you structure your own program and you know where you're going,
Mm-hmm.
then you put that into it.
Yeah, because you
No.
have the buy-in to structure your own program, and you want to get back, and you want to get back to the field, and you want to get back in shape, rather than you think, oh, my parents want me to do this, or like whatever outside pressure there is, because that could only lead to. I've seen that before with teammates and stuff, that they were kind of like they would like tear their ACL or some big injury that takes a long time to get back from, and they kind of be like, yeah, I don't really know. And then they'd try and play. They wouldn't do the rehab to the fullest extent, and then they would get hurt again. And then at that time, then it goes into their, like, it's a huge mental thing, because everything they've done their whole life for this one sport is now gone. They can't do it anymore. And then you have to deal with the mental side that way as well. So definitely, like you were saying, it's important to make sure that the athlete wants to, like, that you know that they really want to go through the training and go and get back on the field, because if they don't and they try it anyways, it could lead to worse things.
Correct.
Otherwise.
And just remember, we are humans, right? So like we're talking today, control is an illusion. You have control over nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You have control over nothing because you can't control anything. Control is just an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
So as an athlete, we won't have control over the situation that's happening in the game.
Right.
But all the factors can be completely different to 10 different directions. You have no control.
You can control your body and what your body's doing, but that's it, really. Like, you don't know what your teammates next to you is going to do. You don't know what your opponent is going to do. You don't know if the ball's going to take a weird bounce on the field. All sorts of things that are outside of your control. Definitely, that's a difficult thing. I feel like people don't understand that sometimes. It's like it leads to frustration in athletes. I feel like sometimes.
Yes, and I think that's some of those things that it comes into buying into an athlete. So knowing where the athlete is, where they stand, where they want to go.
Mm-hmm.
I need to earn their trust.
Right.
I need to earn to make sure they want to work with me, not for me.
Right.
They need to understand that I'm my team. They need to understand that I'm here to help them and educate them, not to make their life miserable.
Right.
Because many times we have coaches that never had an experience coaching,
No.
and they basically bully the kids. And now the kids have a self-defense mechanism to basically reject whatever the coach is saying.
Right. They just want to make the kids run or whatever, all sorts of wacky things.
Correct. And basically understanding where the kid is.
Mm-hmm.
I do basically a psychological evaluation before I even go into a mechanical evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, understand where they are, what their past been, what was their childhood like.
Right.
Understanding how they got into the sport. Oh, it was that who put you in the sport. Oh, you really wanted to play soccer. Okay, so tell me more about it.
Yeah.
Now, really understanding where the kid comes from, it helps you to develop the structure for the workout.
Mm-hmm.
Because now you get to know your athlete.
Right.
You get to know where the kid came from. You get to know where this athlete came from. What was it like doing the injury? What was it going through your head when you were sitting in bed right after surgery?
Right.
So really getting to know your athlete is the key. And from that, now the athlete gets to trust you.
Right, definitely.
Now the athlete trusts you. Now the ankle starts trusting itself.
Mm-hmm.
because they need to trust something that is going to be there to hold them before they fall.
Definitely.
And not knowing is scary for anybody.
Right.
Because if you go into a woods, into the jungle, and it's dark, you're afraid, but what are you afraid of? Are you afraid of the dark, the unknown, right?
Yeah,
but there is two factors there. There is things that we call the unknown, right? So we know there is something that we don't know.
Right.
But we don't know what is it that we don't know what else is in there. So there's two factors.
Right.
You only know what you don't know.
Right.
But you don't know what you don't know inside
Exactly.
the jungle. And
Exactly.
that's an even stronger fear.
Right.
So they know they may get hurt, but they don't know how they're going to get hurt again.
Yeah.
But now they goes into like, what will I get hurt playing? What happened if I land? Now they goes to the fear factor.
Yeah, and then they don't jump, and if they jump softer or not as explosive as they should, and that can lead to more injury. You hear that in basketball all the time. You're taken to the hoop and you go soft, you're more likely to get hurt because you're going to get clobbered by the big guy instead of taking the contact like you otherwise would before you got hurt. Yeah, that's interesting. How much does your workout plan change based on the psychological?
So I take at least an hour and a half with each athlete based on how serious they are, and also with every client. So you get people that are coming back from an injury. It can be like a spinal cord or a fuse. It can be a knee replacement.
Right.
And so many other factors can go into a client. So as an athlete, right?
Right.
So basically, the first thing I do, I go through a scanning. They get to know their body. Right after that, I go into a passive assessment. But before I go into movement, I go into basically first thing, which is activation. Do you really know how to activate this muscle? Yes, no. Okay, if you don't, I'll teach you.
Okay.
Why? Because if we're going to have an athlete do squats, if they're only activating their quads and they don't know how to use their glutes.
Not good.
Correct.
Yeah.
So they have to understand that. For an activation, we go to a pre-warm-up, right? The activation can be just body weights, understanding, scanning. From there, we're going to active stretches. Or active release stretches based on what the athlete needs. And then from there, we're going to a mobility stretch and flexibility patterns. Where because they have to be able to understand the elasticity of the muscle, the elongation of the muscle with the tendon, and the mobility with the muscle, tendon, joints, and ligaments.
Right.
So they have to be able to understand what joint really needs to move and what joint doesn't have to move.
Right, and how it all connects and stuff.
Correct, because if I have someone doing bilateral mechanics, they have to understand that the ankle needs to rotate. The knee doesn't have to rotate.
Right.
The hip needs to open. The knee doesn't have to go inwards. So if they don't understand those patterns, then we go into the muscle balancing. Well, what part of your body is actually doing most of the work? And then from there, we start developing the program.
And then you execute the program, obviously.
Correct. Then you start executing the program, and you go into the first week protocol. And based on how many times they're training with you, and then you go to the second week protocol. The first 4-week protocol is activation and domination of the patterns.
Right.
So the moment the athlete understands what they're doing and how they're trying to accomplish those patterns, now you see their development. Until you go into a performance patterns, right?
Right.
And now you go into a complete different functional. You go either, before I start loading my weights with my athletes with weights and stuff,
Right.
I really need to know the athlete is moving right.
Right. The patterns of movement are the way they need to be, so when you put more stress, it doesn't crumble under.
Correct. So it's building up the stronger foundation will
Right.
only allow me to put more weight on top of the foundation.
Right. That makes sense. So how did you get into this? Is that most of the people that I know do not have this level of understanding of how the mind connects to the body and what steps need to be taken to make sure that injuries are prevented, and when people are injured, what it takes to get back and prevent re-injury. So how did you, what happened where you got into this sort of the marriage of psychology with the body and performance? How did you get into this sort of thing?
So, my first professional contract when I signed for soccer, I was 14. So just be able to understand the kid where they're coming from this point of view is a big deal.
Right.
So playing national team when I was 15, going to a World Cup, U17 World Cup qualifications, it was just a huge thing for me because my legs were shaking. I was about to pee my pants from the moment you step in the stadium, right?
Yeah.
And now you're seeing guys that are way taller from you. I remember one time stepping into the stadium, we're playing U17 Jamaican team.
Yeah.
I mean, I was like 5'2", these guys are like 5'9", you are just like, what am I going to do here?
Right.
You start doubting yourself without even stepping, even before the game starts.
Yeah.
You're shaking, the players, and you're right shaking because you just don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
So I basically going through the stress myself, going through the high performance of stress. It basically was a big teacher for me at that time. I really didn't understand what that was until I basically started developing my professional career. And I mean, from that point, I got shipped to South America at that time. A lot of the national teams would basically send players all over South America to understand
El Salvador,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
El Salvador, okay.
Understand new strategies for soccer, and then ended up in Brazil, ended up in Argentina, and you understand different methodologies of soccer.
Right.
So at that point, I was like, well, what am I going to do for high school? Well, my high school was so some countries here you go to high school, grade 12. Over there you go to grade 9 and you pick a tech school.
Okay.
So tech school for me was medical school.
Okay.
So I work at the morgue.
Right.
As a volunteer for fun. Why? Because I think human anatomy is one of my passions. And then from there, basically working with the medical team and a lot of those teams, you're working with some of the best professionals in the world.
Right.
And you're understanding how the body works. And I volunteered to be in some of the surgeries to see how to do a meniscus repair.
Right.
And then from there, you are with the medical staff, learning how they're going to get this athlete back in X amount of time.
Right.
So it's a completely different experience than just going through a book.
Yeah, definitely.
And now when you go into this, now the first thing I remember, I was in Brazil. The first thing I remember, the coach was like, all right, how do you feel? The whole therapy was talking to the athlete for 2 days. Was never actually putting the athlete to a crazy workout.
That's interesting. That's not very common here, I don't think.
Correct. So every country has different regulations. Every country has different regulations for a physical therapist, for a kinesiologist. And that's why I think everything comes from experience.
Right.
And I think your best school is life. And at this point is understanding what you're doing is what you love. If you don't understand that, then you're in the wrong career. Since I was a kid, I understood what I liked was the human body and the psychology behind it. So understanding that was a huge point for me. My dad was a psychologist, so that also helped a lot too.
Cool.
So understanding that was very different, and coming out from a third world country like El Salvador after the Civil War, you wake up and you see a bunch of bodies piled up on the side of the road and growing up with all the violence and the MS-13 trying to recruit you to go join the gang, and you're trying to fighting your way around to go into playing professional, and sometimes not eating. So you basically understand what determination makes you do, and how you stay in a clear path in order to accomplish what you want to accomplish.
Yeah.
So coming to this country was a completely different point, because then I had major injuries where I ended my career. And that's the reason why I got into a full complete, which was recovery and understanding how the human body works. And a lot of these things, to be honest with you, a lot of these things, you marry them together not because you learn from the book, you learn from the school, you learn from life experience. But also understanding what pain is, understanding what's laying in bed and to be able to get up, and understanding what goes through your head. And I think that's one of the big factors that comes into knowing what the other person is, having the sympathy and having the connection.
You've experienced those things before, like definitely other trainers or doctors who have not been athletes at least college or some sort of high level, or haven't been injured before to the point where you're laying in bed after surgery and you can't move because your leg is like they repaired your knee or your ankle or whatever the case is. Like being able to connect with that athlete on that, like, hey, I was there, I understand what you're going through, this is how we're going to get you through it. I feel like as an athlete, you trust way more when that person has experienced that before, and that leads to, like you were saying, you need to make sure that your athlete trusts you.
Correct.
Whereas other trainers or coaches or whatever, the trust isn't there, and then like you said, they build the defense mechanisms and to reject what that coach is saying because they don't trust what that coach is saying, and then that leads to all sorts of other problems.
Correct, and that's why I think it's important for me to know where the athlete comes into place.
Right.
I had this athlete where he came from a home where dad is abusive, beats mom up, beats the kid up, goes into training. Now, obviously, the coach has some aggressive issues, angerment issues. Now the kid becomes defensive. The kid is 13 years old. He's developing through emotions. What do you think the kid is going to learn?
And he's going to be defensive, anger, resentment.
And now, guess what? The kid is being judged and say, well, this is a bad player, too bad he's too angry.
Yeah.
There was never understanding. There was never time for this kid to express his emotions. The kid was never asked, how do you feel today? Is everything okay at home? Did you say, you're sucked today, go home?
Right.
And now we're killing many jump players through the same concept.
Yeah, definitely.
So, and that's when it comes into a psychological point of view, right? And now they go play with anger.
Yeah.
Now we have athletes that are getting injured, and they get recover and they realize they don't like soccer.
Yeah.
Soccer was a way of outlet for whatever they were dealing with at home.
Mm-hmm.
Or some kids realize they actually love soccer
Yeah.
because ex-coach said this to them and motivated them.
Right.
So as a coach, I think we have the power to destroy an athlete or build an athlete. And I think it's a big factor for whoever wants to wear a band-aid, say I'm coach, is to really know that how coach is a very strong word. They have to understand that coaching is an art. The coaching is a huge responsibility. It's not just to go there and what they want is what the kids want.
Yeah, I don't think some of them realize the impact that they have on those kids. Like if you were to ask, like me, I remember all the coaches I had and whether I liked them, what I liked about them, what I didn't like what sort of impact they had on me. I'm sure you're the same. You remember all the coaches you had, and for you Dylan as well. But especially for you going into coaching, you've already realized that, and so you take that approach into each individual athlete, and it allows you to connect with people. It's like I've seen so many people go through that gym that like the energy in that gym is trusting and positive, and that's not where it is everywhere. And it's really great to be in there and just to know that like everybody trusts each other because they know that's what you're doing and you've built that culture there, and it's all based on your experience growing up and through your experiences with the national team, like you were saying, and then being in Brazil and coach is like, hey, how are you? How do you feel? It's like all of that built up to where you're at now, and the impact that you have, I feel like on a lot of teenagers, especially on younger athletes, is huge. So for me to be a part of it is really cool. And to learn. But I just want to touch back on when you were growing up in El Salvador. How did you? So you're trying to go pro, right? And you said you have like the gangs trying to recruit you.
Yeah.
How did you navigate that as a kid and then keep yourself on the right path into where you are now versus falling into that sort of life?
To be honest with you, I don't know how I did it. So it was very interesting because I was 13 years old. And I didn't pick up soccer until I was 8, maybe.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, I had all kinds of people, teach me soccer. And at that point, I had never even gone to a stadium before, like to play. Mm-hmm. It was different.
Right.
And I think the physical aspect, growing up in a third world country, growing up in a farm or in a city, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. You kind of picture yourself what's like to be a professional athlete.
Of course, yeah.
That's your dream. It was like, I want to play professional soccer, or I want to do it. Because for me, it wasn't an option. There was a soccer ball when I was born.
Yeah.
And it's not like you have the option. It's like, no, you're going to play soccer.
Yeah.
But it wasn't really something that I loved. Uh-huh. Until I started the competition aspect, that's when I really understood that I love the competing aspect of the game. And I was 12, and I was playing in academies and things, which their academies, there's so many kids, they don't have the chance to even go to an academy. So I used to travel 3 hours when I was 12. I used to run away from home just to go train.
Wow.
And the third world country is not that easy because you see a kid that is not outside town, so the gang member is like, maybe he's a gang member, we need to go ask him what's up. Yeah. And that's when you really understand that you have to be on the lookout for yourself and you realize you have no one else.
Right.
But you need to also understand why you're doing those things. At the young age, I didn't really know why I was doing it, to be honest with you. I just knew I wanted to play.
Right.
And I wanted to see what I can accomplish within me getting the proper training. Mm-hmm. So, age 13, 14, one of my friends was, hey, dude, it's going to be a U17 tryout. Even though you're 2 years younger, you should go give it a shot. I said, sure. First time I stepped in a big stadium, full of people. I show up, it's going to be maybe like 7 kids since one of my friends was playing for national team. I'm like, maybe it's like a personal invitation, and you step into the team and it's like 9 teams with the same age. I'm like, holy crap. Yeah. You're already beating yourself up even before you get to the stadium. And next thing you know, out of those people, I only picked 6 kids. And I was one of the ones that were selected. And then from age 14, I realized that 13 is when I realized that soccer was my thing. And in whatever training session I went through, it was raining, sun, 110 degrees outside, I still do my training. Right. And it's not like there was books. I mean, the years go by, there's more studies, there's more science behind this. Before it was basically how much can I push. Right. And that's what led me to all these injuries I have now. Right. But there is a lot of people, even now, they still want to push their kids to their limits. And that's what I did with myself. Right. pushed to my limit. So at that point, I was one of the youngest players on the national team, and then I was also playing for Aguila, first division team in El Salvador.
Okay.
And I mean, now you go from like I love playing soccer to like, hey, dude, you're playing with my kid's salary. If you messed up, this is on you.
Yeah.
They're like, now you're playing soccer under stress.
Right.
Now understanding that concept is also like, these people are yelling at me. Now this guy is telling me my own team player, if I messed up, he's gonna lose his salary. And now you gotta go into the field and do a good job.
Yeah.
So to me, even before you step in the field, is the psychological
The
point of
stress
view.
is already there. Were you able to, once you stepped in the field, to kind of put that aside once with the salary portion, or was that always there?
It was always a. This is an example.
Uh-huh.
It was so many other things because when you step in the field, you start thinking, I hope I don't make the mistake I didn't practice last week.
Right.
And now you're beating yourself up, and that's what I understand now. It's a sympathetic stage.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm able to understand that now to kids that are training now.
Right.
Because a lot of people that haven't stepped in the stadium with 50,000 spectators and you are 14 years old and be able to understand that it's not the same.
No.
You have to step and take a penalty to go into a World Cup qualification for U17. It's a completely different point.
Yeah.
So it's a completely different stress. As a coach, yes, you can be coaching, but it's hard for you to understand it if you haven't actually been in the skin of someone who's doing it. You know?
Yeah.
That's why I sympathize and I basically connect a lot more with the players because I understand what that's like.
Yeah, and that's a unique experience anyway. It's very hard to replicate that.
Correct.
There are other experiences that as a coach you can replicate.
Yeah.
But that's not one of them.
Correct. And just go into practice, man. Just go into practice every day. I was going to practice 2-3 hours. For instance, I will leave at like 2 p.m. to go to practice, 2-hour travel.
Uh-huh.
You will skip lunch because I didn't tell my mom.
Yeah.
And then you get a practice, and then now semester 13 waiting you got to give him $1.
Yeah.
You know, be able to go through the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And now, if you don't have the $1, you better be a fast runner because most likely they're gonna catch you.
Yeah.
You know, I was a stop multiple times just to be able to make a practice, and you continue. Gotta show up knowing that you make a stop again.
Yeah.
Here, your parents drop you off.
Yeah.
Your parents pick you up. How bad do you want it? It's up to you.
Yeah, it is because all the opportunity is right there.
Correct. So once again, it's how hungry you are, how much you want to push through, but how much you actually want it.
Yeah. Do you think that having all the opportunities right in front of kids here kind of takes that hunger out of some of them?
I think sometimes some kids are very appreciative and they understand and they push through. But I think the parents want it more than the kids want it.
Yeah.
You actually gotta get my kid to want it, me wanting it, and push my kid to do it.
Right.
So that's what I say about the parents' education aspect.
Definitely.
But yeah, I mean, and from there, just surviving gangs and going through all this other nonsense, missing your bus. That was the last bus going to the city, now asking for rides to whoever is going to stop in the middle of the nighttime, getting a ride to go,
Yeah.
You don't know if the person is drunk, they're going to kidnap you. You have no idea.
Yeah.
You just know you got to make it home. Before your mom finds out that you didn't make it to school to go to practice.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, once again, the kids to skip practice or go to school, but I'm just saying it's a completely different mindset.
Yeah, it's a different world. Like, if you don't live in it, you don't... Like, you can tell me the story, but I'm not going to understand unless I live it. So, but by the same token, it's like it's good for people to know that story because some people don't even know that exists or like that life exists. So for getting it out there is like, I keep harping on this in the different episodes of the podcast, but like every time somebody has a story like that, I'm like, this is why we're doing this. So people like you can tell that story so people understand. Like, people go through all sorts of different things, and that's what makes them the way they are. Like, moving forward, say, hey, why did you say that thing, or why did you react that way? It's because of like all the gazillion different things that happened to them when they were little, or how they grew up, or what they experienced. So yeah, it's like this is why we wanted to do this. So that's really good for that. You can come share that with us for sure.
Yeah, and I'm going to put one more last thing there is basically the way I tell people is like, if you have an angry dog, will you breed the angry dog?
Nope.
Why not?
Because you don't want more of them.
Just think about this. How many of us are going through so much trauma and so much anger, but we still have kids?
Yeah.
But we're not responsible enough to educate those kids.
Right.
That cell, that chromosome, that DNA is being transferred to these people. And now you're responsible to educate your kids.
Yeah.
And be able to own whatever you did in order to help these kids. That's why I go back into a psychological point of view, not just a mechanical point of view.
Right.
Just the same way you look just like your dad, internally you may feel like just like your mother.
Right.
But you don't know what your mom or your grandma went through.
Yeah, you have
And
no
by not
idea.
knowing them, you don't know what you're dealing about yourself either.
Right. That's important too, to know where your own, where like where you come from, so you know why you act a certain way, and if it's a bad thing, to change it, and if not so bad, to at least understand why. Gives you like that look in the mirror, gives you a whole other insight into who you are. I feel like it's a hard thing to do, to look yourself in the mirror and figure out why you do things the way you do, because there's things that you didn't expect, or things that you didn't want to know, that are there, that once you look, you have to go through that whole cycle of, all right, well, I found this thing out about myself that I really didn't want to know. How am I going to deal with it now?
Correct.
And then you need outlets for that, and like playing sports is one of those outlets.
Correct.
So that's a big thing as well. It's teaching kids, like you said, educating kids to cope, and like how to deal with themselves and their emotions is such a huge thing. I feel like it doesn't get enough. It is getting more now. The mental health stuff that we see going on now. You see a lot of people harping on that more on social media, like, oh, mental health days and all sorts of stuff like that. Like my company will have like, say, hey, if you need a mental health day from work, that's like an acceptable excuse now. Whereas 10 years ago, that was not an acceptable
Correct.
thing to do. And obviously there's a whole athletic side to the mental health. And I know you posted a couple videos about athletic mental health specifically, but how do you identify that within the within the psychological eval, and how do you kind of help those athletes come along mentally, like just the mental side rather than the body to mind, but just the mental side if they're dealing with anxiety or depression or anything like that? Do you have athletes that have those, and if so, how do you
Yes.
help them?
I mean, yes. I think we all deal with all kinds of stress on a daily basis.
Sure.
But I think having faith and also understanding where you stand is a big part. There is a big factor into either whatever beliefs you have. Is also being thankful for things that you don't have. You could have no health.
Right.
You could have no leg, but you still have it.
Yeah.
Just be able to be thankful and concentrate on the small things and being grateful for what you have, not for what you can't have, is a big factor, right? It's the approach. You can either see the glass halfway full or halfway empty.
Yeah.
But teaching kids how to see it the right way is a completely different factor. Past 14 years, I've been working with all kinds of athletes and clients where you get people that are 300 pounds, they want to commit suicide because they're tired of being fat.
Right.
Like they lose 150 pounds and they gain it again in 3 years.
Right.
So that factor is a huge factor because food, they gotta continue to eat.
Yeah.
It's an addiction.
Yeah.
But now you have athletes, the only outlet they have is soccer. Now you take soccer away, what happens?
If they're eating too much, they gain all that weight.
Correct. That's just an example, right? So it's just same with any sport. I'm just using soccer since it's my main sport.
Right.
Just think about you're playing professional now. You have a pay cut. Now you don't know when you're going to play next. Now you're 28 and that's the only way you feed your family and you don't know anything else because you didn't have college education.
Right.
Now you put in your life in a completely different perspective. You start thinking about, do I need to work on landscaping? Do I really need to go back into doing GrabHub or doing Uber?
Yeah.
And now you have professional athletes losing their heads because they don't really know what they're going to do because they weren't smart enough to know how to manage their money. And also they didn't have the right mentors to tell them, hey, listen, this may happen. You may get injured. You should start investing now. You should definitely only put X money to the side. Management. Teaching how to manage their life and basically pray and have faith. And the only thing I say is pray for what you can't have. Is be thankful for what you have.
Right.
And to have patience.
Yeah, patience
because,
is huge.
Yeah, if you don't understand what patience means, it's a completely different factor.
Yeah.
So working with athletes, they're going 16, 17, their career just start, and next thing you know, they're about to get a tryout overseas, and now they're shut down, and now the team says, I don't want them anymore. Now they feel their life is ending because they're still going through an emotional regulation, just getting to know themselves.
Right.
And now they think maybe soccer is not for me, maybe this is a signal. They don't see the reality from a different point of view.
Right.
So that's another factor. Why?
Yeah.
Because you have to kind of bring it to reality and, hey, listen, the world is not ending. It just give you a completely different point. It's time for you to work on your weaknesses and actually make this become a stronger point when you have a different tryout, you're gonna be in a better point than just not working on this.
Right.
So you basically give them a different outlet.
Yeah.
You basically put them in a different focus point where they're able to concentrate on something different
Right.
than what the negativity is happening around them.
Right. You focus the energy in a different place instead of where what didn't happen that they wanted to. You focus it into, okay, how can we use this to make ourselves better?
Correct.
Yeah.
So basically use that time for something positive.
Right.
And basically utilize that time and become a better version of yourself.
Yeah.
Better, a lot more effort in what things you didn't want to put effort on. Time for rehabilitation, time for recovery, and really emphasize on being grateful, basically.
Yeah. Is that something? I feel like that's something that makes it sound so simple to say, take the negative energy or the energy and focus it into something positive instead of negative. But really, if you get the right mentor or the right person that helps you do that, that can change everything almost. Because you're just sitting there wallowing in, oh, I didn't get this tryout, and you're just reflecting on that one bad thing. But you need like a friend or a family member to say, hey, let's focus it somewhere else. And like it sounds so simple, like when we just say it out loud, but sometimes it's not that simple.
Correct. So I tell you, this is basically one of the things I tell my young athletes is like, the first time we grew up with my grandfather. My grandfather was born in 1902, so you can imagine the education he had, right?
Yeah.
So you basically go into the woods, and I was 8, 9 years old, and I killed my first animal.
Mm-hmm.
And you taking a life away with your own hands, and now you have to clean the animal, you gotta eat it.
Right.
You respect food.
Yeah.
You respect life.
Yeah.
But here, everything is given to us. We throw food away.
Yeah.
We take things for granted.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really appreciate things that are given to us and respect that we deserve things without doing anything.
Right.
So knowing that means we feel that we're entitled to so many things, and when things really hit us hard because we're not used to being
the hardship.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it's basically being raw and out. So I think the educational aspect as a parent, as a mentor, it's a big key. But emphasizing in the kids' mental health or the human mental health is a big point, just by knowing where they are.
Right.
Because not everyone is the same. You can't treat everyone the same way.
Right.
Yeah, some people will overcome things easier, some people won't. So you really have to really know who you're working with.
Makes sense. I'll ask a couple more questions, but we can get Rachel on later in a different episode to talk about the business side of things. But so you've taken all these experiences that you've had, and you had this passion for the anatomy of the human body and the psychology behind it. And then obviously you had the performance piece of you playing in the national team when you were young. And then how did you, when you came to America, how did you decide that you wanted to, or not how did you decide you wanted to start a business, but how did you go about doing that? Because in America, you need licenses and certifications and business licenses and all sorts of things. So did you have to go back to school and get some licenses, or how did you end up going from the end of your soccer career into where you are now, where you have the gym and you're training people from that unique aspect of using the psychology?
So that was a different journey, man. At that point, I didn't know anything about psychology.
Uh-huh.
At that point, I was just getting to know myself, to be honest with you.
Right.
I just knew survival. I just knew how to survive, right?
Uh-huh.
So basically, my soccer career ended when I was very young, and I was 18, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I couldn't go to high school because I was 18, so I had
Right.
to figure out GED, whatever. And I basically had to figure out how I was going to survive in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll explain next another episode of how that happened. But long story short, I went to Falls Church High School first to figure out how I was going to get my GED.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, well, you speak no English.
Right.
You have to actually first learn the language, then we'll figure out where we're going to put you.
Right.
And they say, well, you want to start at grade 9. But I was living in Bellsville, Maryland.
That's far.
Yeah. So I didn't know how to use a metro or any of that stuff. So I went to PG County High School. And I had to do homeschooling.
Right.
But I also had to find a part-time job to work because my parents are not here. I lived in this country since I was 17 on my own.
Yeah.
So at that point, my manager helped me get a place with my uncle. And at that point, I moved out of my uncle's house. And then you realize they're like, crap, I have to go back to high school.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got a job finally, sweeping the furniture store. I was cleaning bathrooms.
Mm-hmm.
But the first thing I looked around was a gym to see where a gym was.
Right.
And I didn't have a car.
Uh-huh.
So I would run 8 miles one direction, go shower, work out 5 in the morning, and go work after that because I didn't have a bike or a car.
Jeez. Yeah.
Every day, rain, shine, or snow, same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't have a cell phone.
Uh-huh.
I didn't have a computer. There was no internet. I was doing mail homeschool system. So I would get this big package of books
sent to you
and sent to me, and I have to finish it after I take a 2-hour ride in the metro.
Yeah.
And go home and study and wake up early in the morning and do it over again.
That's amazing.
So
The drive to do that every day, especially 8 miles. Like, if I get up and run like even like 3 or 4 miles, but double that every day. That's crazy.
In my run, I never felt it because in my run, when I got my job, so after 2 months doing that, I said, this is nonsense. I have to find a place where I can move closer, right?
Right.
And then I moved to Fairfax to one of the guys I met playing soccer. So I was playing soccer on the weekends in one of the Spanish leagues that were paying me like $200 a game. And I was paying for my education like that. So I was making like $800 a week and playing 4 games Saturday and Sunday.
Right.
So it was good money for me, plus I was working. And one of the guys was like, hey, do you want to move with us? We have an extra room. I said, sure. They never told me that was being evicted. They were being evicted, and they never had a bank account. They just got here.
Wow.
And they pulled my money under the mattress, and they took everything. So I lived in a shelter for a month and a half, just to try to figure out where I was going to go next.
Right.
And at that point, they took all my homework too. All my high school, because they evicted everything. They put everything in the corner.
Oh, that's crazy.
Right? So basically, you have to start over again.
Right.
But long story short is, I had to learn the language within 4 months. If not, I wasn't going to be able to actually have a job because the place where I was working was right on Gallows Road and Lee Highway. Old furniture store was a consignment store, and everyone there spoke English. So the guy was like, "Hey, listen, you have to give you a shot, but you have to learn the language."
Right.
And I used to go to Gold Gym, the one on Gallows Road. And I used to pass Prosperity. I used to pass all the way down by Germantown in Fairfax, and I used to run from there all the way to there every morning. And then basically, I had to learn the language. I picked the biggest book I can find in English, and I started reading without knowing what I was saying.
Yeah.
I picked this book called Letters to Iwo Jima, and that's since I started learning history. But basically, from there, it took me a year and a half to finish 3 years of high school. And I finished high school at 4.3 GPA.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so basically, I finished 3 years within a year and a half, and that basically opened the doors for me to prepare myself mentally and also academically. And from that point, I started taking college credits and basically going to a completely different route, which was basically performance and admin, and again certifications to personal training and really learning what the human body was in rehabilitation.
Yeah.
So I went from drawing upper doors from back in 2008. I went to San Diego, basically took the kettlebell certification. In order to get certified from them, you have to actually perform. So you actually, every certification I ever gotten was you have to perform in order to get certified. A lot of trainers basically they get certified online and they go teach people without even knowing
they're
doing the right
They just
form.
read a book, click a couple buttons, and they get the cert.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I mean, my first book I ever read was Power for the People by Pablo. I mean, just understanding and educating yourself was a huge point, you know.
Yeah.
I knew the anatomy, understand. I mean, I don't know how a car works, but I can tell you every tendon in your body because I had to be proud of something that I knew.
Yeah.
So you have to put your ego in your craft. And my ego was basically on how much knowledge I had about the human body mechanically.
Right.
Because that's the only thing I did growing up. So putting that into the psychological part was very simple because I kind of picture myself doing those things and understanding it was a completely different factor. But now, this past 2-3 years, I have had to emphasize a lot into the psychological point of view for athletes and overall for performance.
Oh, okay, so you didn't get into that until a little bit later.
Yeah, I understood what it was until really understanding how to explain it. You understand it, but you don't know how to explain it.
Right.
But when you understand it, you learn how to explain it. So for one point, we worked with Dr. George Carlo. He was the performance coach for the Detroit Tigers and the Buffalo Bills.
Okay.
And he is a huge believer in how the psychology and mind and body connection works. And
right.
He has done so much work with so many athletes in understanding what the epigenetic activation and you're going into a sympathetic nervous station, parasympathetic nervous station make a huge factor into what sports development is. So it was a completely different thing. It changed completely how you view sports, how you view life,
Right.
period. And just going from there, just really understanding. There's a lot of certification that doesn't really teach you many things, but really understanding books just the body keeps the score. It's a book that teaches you how trauma is healing your body, storing your body, and you're able to overcome it.
Right.
It's things that is not just certifications. It's basically self-improvement.
Yeah.
So many things you can have a license, but if you don't know how to implement it, it doesn't mean that you really know what you're doing.
Right.
But really understanding the concept of what you're learning and what you're getting the license for, then yes, you will understand what you're doing with that license.
Yeah, because you have to implement it and use it in your everyday practices.
And you gotta be your first client. You have to be your first guinea pig.
Yeah, because that's how you try it. You don't want to try it on somebody else, and then it doesn't work, and you make them worse.
Correct.
That wouldn't be too good.
And then, like you asked, how did I become from going into professional athlete to get into my regular lifestyle? I was at the gym, at Gold's Gym, outside the gym every morning at 5 in the morning before they open. I was the first person there.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy's like, you should start working here. I'm like, man, how?
Yeah.
That was 2005.
Mm-hmm.
End of 2004, beginning of 2005. He's like, well, get the certification. And I think it was ACE.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even remember how, when I got my certification and I went through it. And next thing you know, I'm training people. The next thing you know, everybody got to know me in the gym, and I started competing in rugby. And I didn't want to play soccer anymore because of my injuries. My career was ended. I had a contract to go to Europe. Everything dropped, so I understood what trauma was.
Yeah.
And then from there, I went through 7 more surgeries, and you completely go and just drop whatever you're dealing with, and you move into something different. And then a lot of my friends at the time helped me. I wasn't built by myself. You have to have people to support you and believe in you.
Right.
And they will give me books. They will get me by. So a lot of good people come to your life when you actually do something good too. Yeah. If you see someone at 5 o'clock in the morning every day, this kid wants something.
Yeah.
So I think that was a huge push. Really getting to know good people.
Mm-hmm.
I got 2 really good friends. They used to play for the Lithuanian national team, rugby national team, and these guys taught me how to lift.
Yeah.
And these guys are like massive dudes. 6'4", 280 pounds.
Is that how you got into bodybuilding?
That's how I got into weightlifting, weight training. Into bodybuilding was later down the road.
Yeah.
But then you start understanding about nutrition, and now you want to change your body, and I start fighting, competing in Muay Thai, and I was doing many other sports throughout my career. Mm-hmm. And it's just like I was lost. I didn't know what I really wanted to do. Mm-hmm. But I think all those years, 10 years from the beginning, what I did in soccer, just coaching, kind of taught me that my passion is soccer, and basically my passion is coaching, is teaching, is educating, to basically take the sport to a completely different level than what actually soccer is.
Yeah, so all this has kind of come full circle for you now. You've opened up the gym. You've been able to use all the things that you've learned in one place with soccer, which is your passion. So what's next? What's next for you?
What's next for us
what's next for you guys?
Is a big question mark, because right now we're trying to just simulate what's happening, because I was kind of like holding back and working with a lot of professional athletes because of the way how things were going. But for the past 2-3 years, I've worked with so many athletes that have come from Europe, all over the United States. But I think it's mainly opening up and opening opportunity for people who really want to develop their career. To me, it's not just about money. It's basically about development.
Right.
And I think making a huge change in students and kids and bringing awareness to mental health and using the sports for the right reasons, not just as an outlet, it will make a huge difference. For the past 2 years, I have volunteered for the Fairfax County for the students outreach program. Basically, I volunteer part of my time to work with kids that are borderline becoming gang members or drug addicts, and I basically tell them my story. And then from there, I'm allowing myself to work with these kids, and I've gone to all kinds of different schools to do talks and just work with youth.
Sure.
And that's basically my main focus right now. We have a big variety of kids that come through the doors, but you can't shut these kids down because they want to learn. If they don't have the money, it doesn't matter. You treat them just like somebody's paying $1,000.
Yeah.
Why? Because in the end of the day, money is one thing, but your principles and values are a completely different thing.
Yeah.
So whatever comes next, it will depend on how life we can support, but mainly is moving on forward, trying to help as many people as we can and really help the youth.
Yeah. So when you go into these outreach programs, how do they work? You go and you tell their story. Are you able to stay in touch with them later? Do you still talk to some of them or not so much?
So social media is a great thing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
social media is a good thing that these kids stay with me. So I worked with two kids like 2 years ago, and now they just got D1 scholarship in college
It's awesome.
for soccer.
Mm-hmm.
So I told them what to do. I'm able to talk to these kids online,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's a big accomplishment because a lot of these kids are able to change and turn around after they were selling pot in middle school
Right.
and they were trying to get into opioids. You get them in to see something completely different.
Yeah.
It's just so sad, even the Hispanic community, how in other different varieties of different status quotes, life, society, some people ask, hey, what college are you going to go to after high school? Normally Latinos is like, are you going to go to college?
Yeah.
They're not even knowing if they're going to go to college. Just the approach itself is a huge factor. So I'm trying to change a lot of the enigma of like how kids should be definitely approach college,
Mm-hmm.
what their education should be, and things how there is so many open doors, so many doors can open for them if they actually knock the right door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So it's basically building networks for kids, doing a lot of outreach.
Is that is that another thing that you when you're with these kids or like when you're training these athletes in general, you network with these different agents and people, I'm sure, so like you've got a network of somebody who needs like different a specialist for a knee or whatever. I'm sure you've got like have you built your network up to where if somebody needs something you could be like, hey, go to this person.
It's very hard. Sometimes you wish you can help everybody, but I think God gives you people and put people on your path for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Have doctors that basically have done surgeries for nothing for some of the athletes that basically left out after their teams,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a huge blessing for these athletes. There are people out there that still wanted to do good. But it's sad that nowadays people are just looking at the bad things.
Right.
And some of these doctors don't even know if the kid can be black, Latino. It doesn't matter. These people want to do good too.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I have developed enough trust around the professional world where many agents always contacting me for professional kids. Kids that want to become professional, and they
Right.
actually have the enough material to be developed and be coached. I think soccer is a school, man. In soccer, you never stop learning. Life is a school, you never stop learning. And so as long as you stay with that mentality, you can go very far and beyond. And at this point, there is many agents, there is many coaches, high school coaches, college coaches. They're always doing outreach to me. Hey, man, do you have an 06? A kid was born 2005. A kid, I need a forward. I need etc.
Right.
And I tell the kids, hey, listen, next month, you're going to need a player, and you guys get your stuff together. And that gives the kids motivation to keep
Yeah.
working. So it keeps these kids with a fire to continue to do something positive.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good place to end this episode. Thank you, sir, for coming on. Your gym is called,
PR Performance Fitness.
and we can find you on Instagram, website.
Yeah, so www.prperformancefitness.com is our website, and we also have Instagram. It's prperformance at prperformance fitness. My personal is Pablo.amaya.7, and that's for Instagram, and same thing for PR Performance and Facebook, and with my
Sounds
social
good.
media everywhere.
Sounds good. You heard it here first. Pablo Amaya, everybody. Bye, everybody.